About 13 years ago, I interviewed Jason Neulander. Went over to his place. We had some laughs. I was interested in talking to him because he had done a show called uh, Intergalactic Nemesis. Now, it was billed as a live action graphic novel. I didn't know what the hell that was. Turns out it's gigantic screens with comic images as people act out the dialogue, and there's some music and stuff that goes with it. And Jason had a background in the theater, and he'd made this cool new thing. Somewhere, I think 2010, he put out an Intergalactic Nemesis comic with Tim Doyle doing the ink, and we talked about that project. So here's that interview. Stick around because there's kind of a cool footnote for what happened when I ran into Jason last year at Austin Film Fest. So I'd seen Jason Neulander around the Austin comic scene, and I read some of his comics. He writes a comic and does a stage play, which is billed as a live-action graphic novel, and the whole thing is called The Intergalactic Nemesis. And I've got to admit, when I read the comics, I just didn't get it. And then I interviewed Jason. I got a little bit more, but everything kind of fell into place when I went and saw a production of the show at the Long Center, which I can wholeheartedly recommend. The Intergalactic Nemesis is a radio play that became a stage play using comic book tropes. And it's a lot of fun. And it's the kind of thing you need to go see live because the actors really bring something to the performance that you just don't get when you're hearing the voices in your head. So here I talked to Jason Neulander about what it's like to make a living on stage and behind the drafting table. So when I was reading through the credits on Intergalactic Nemesis, I read that this got its start in the Salvage Vanguard Theater. What's the kind of origin of the story?
Yeah. So Intergalactic got its start actually as a radio play first, back a long ago in the mid-90s. Me and some friends, well actually a friend of mine named Ray Colgan approached me. He worked at Little City Coffee House downtown, and I had just started this little theater company called Salvage Vanguard Theater. And he was like, what do you think about doing a radio play and doing it at the coffee house I work at? And I was like, sounds great.
Yeah.
So we gathered up some writers and really it was done completely as a lark. So we had 4 writers on the project. A writer would, and Ray and I came up with like a very rough outline of how the story was going to go and who the characters were. But it was done almost like Exquisite Corpse style. So a writer would start on a Monday writing a 15-minute episode and then finish by Wednesday, hand off their episode to the next writer. They would work from Wednesday to Friday, hand off both scripts to me. I would get a group of look at how many characters there were, frantically make phone calls, pull together a cast, and then we would do kind of a read-through and then a rehearsal on a Saturday at Buzz Moran's house. Buzz did the sound effects for this thing, and he had never done sound effects before. So then after the script, we would rummage through his kitchen to find stuff to make noise with.
Yeah.
The next day, we would rehearse the sound effects. Then that night, we would load in to Little City Coffee House with rented PA from Rock and Roll Rental, and then performed both episodes in front of an audience and recorded on cassette tape 4-track. I mean, that was the deal.
That's very high tech.
And we did it over a course. We did 2 episodes a week for 5 weeks, and so many people came out, we literally could not fit them in the venue. And I told Ray, at some point during the process, I remember having the conversation saying, dude, I'm gonna stick with this. Like, not every day, but we're not going to let this thing go, because someday I think we've tapped into a vein in terms of storytelling and the kind of story people like to hear. And I think we'll play the paramount with this thing. Let's give it 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and I had that conversation, but didn't really follow up on the project at all. But a few years later, Buzz got his hands on a portable digital recording device. And so he suggested to me to pare down the project down to an evening-length show that we could then record digitally, and I thought that was a great idea. So me and Ray and Jessica Reisman, another writer on the project, got together and basically just took this kind of giant, very meandering, episodic, not very together script.
Most of my first drafts are like that.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. and condensed it down to an evening light show, and did that, and it went well enough where we decided next year we'd do a sequel, so we did that, and then a few years later, I decided to go back to it to do a third part, and right at that time, the project got interest from a former producer of Prairie Home Companion,
Yeah.
who had turned into a booking agent for touring shows, and she thought it could tour. So all of a sudden, the project just kind of got elevated like a bunch, and almost exactly 10 years later, we played the 1,200 seat Hog Auditorium. So not the Paramount, but the Hog Auditorium at the UT Performing Arts Center. The show was sold out. And the radio version went on tour. Very fits and starts. And over the course of the first year, I came to the realization actually that the script that we had pared down still had too much garbage left over from the original draft. And it really was, the material was feeling really immature to me. And so a friend of mine, Chad Nichols, is another writer who I really love working with, and I invited him to work with me to basically do an overhaul. And we did a top to bottom overhaul of the piece that formed the foundation of the script that became the comic book. And I started throwing around the idea of wouldn't it be cool to take this story and make it into a movie? And people would respond, a lot of people responded what do you mean? Shoot actors talking into microphones? They just didn't, they couldn't extrapolate the story. And so I thought, well, maybe we should I was trying to think of a medium that would work to tell a story visually, and of course comic books came to mind. Yeah. And Tim Doyle, who did the artwork on this, had done a series of backdrops for the live show, and when it toured, he created an 18-inch by 18-inch drawing that the UT Performing Arts Center scene shop blew up into an 18-foot by 18-foot backdrop. I mean, it was professionally scene painted, incredible, with his amazing comic book style. And so I asked him if he wanted to do a comic book, and lo and behold, he told me that he'd always wanted to do a comic book, a real comic book, but never had the opportunity, and this was it. So he was really excited. He loved the story. So we started the process of that, and as we were just launching into that, a major producing entity out of New York decided that they were interested in bringing the show to a commercial run in New York City. Yeah. So I was like, holy mackerel, my life is about to change. And all they needed was the green light from the guy who owned their company. So there was an office of 50 people in New York, but the guy who owned their company lived in London. So we arranged in the schedule for him to come to New York to see the show. They flew us up there to perform the show so he could see it, so he could green light it. And it was holy mackerel, life is about to really change. And we did the best performance we've probably ever done in the show, and the guy didn't show up. I mean, it was And at first and 2 days later I met with the people in the office, and I was like, what's going on? And they're like, we don't know. And 6 months later, when they still had not actually gotten an answer from him on the project, we realized it was dead. And we were in the spring of 2009, which is the low point of the economy. Yes. And I was out of work, and I hadn't scheduled any more touring because I thought we were going to open in New York, and it was bad. And I put a resume together. I was desperately in need of a job. Cliff Red, God bless the man, said, Jason, there's got to be a better way. Why don't we just do your show in the big hall? Well, that's a 2,400 seat theater, and I could do the math real quick and go, oh my God, that could really save my life. Yeah. So, but immediately I was like, man, the project works even in a 1,000 seat theater. It starts to get dwarfed by the venue. The visuals are in these sound effects. They're done by people's hands. How will a show like that play in an event? Yeah. And then it hit me in this flash. I had been, a few years back, Philip Glass and Kronos Quartet had come through Austin with Dracula, the 1931 Todd Browning. And they replaced the music soundtrack with their own original music.
and played it while the movie played on a screen the size of the Proscenium Arch at Bass Concert Hall. They played on the stage, and they were lit in such a way where you could see them through the screen. And it was so simple, and it was mesmerizing.
Yeah.
And I thought, we could do that with the comic book artwork we're creating. Project it the size of the proscenium. I mean, that would be a visual spectacle that would play to the very back seat of the house and make this thing make economic sense in terms of the cost of bringing a show out on the road to be able to play bigger houses. And I literally ran home, and at that point, issue 1 of the comic book series was fully drawn, penciled and inked, and about 4 pages, no, at that point 2 pages had been colored. So
we're ready to go.
yeah, right. So I grabbed the imagery in color and grabbed audio from a recording of the radio play and kind of did editing on the radio play recording and sort of stuck it all together and made it ended up being 1 minute and 9 seconds of show.
Yeah.
And just put it all together to see what it would look like in that format. And I was like, I think I've just stumbled onto something that might just be really cool.
Yeah. At least it'll be really large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even more so, I was like, the mixture of these two elements, the simplicity of the images just sort of, literally cross-fading through each other, combined with the audio of the radio play. It's all so simple, but the whole is actually greater than the sum of the parts. And I had told Tim that what I wanted to do with the comic book was have him draw it, like basically do 2 issues on spec, and then I would have something concrete in my hands that I could then shop around to see what kind of interest there was. And so I found somebody to invest in the project exactly this way. Like Cliff actually hooked me up with this guy, but it's a guy named Mark Serif, who's this is amazing actually, one of the 5 co-founders of a company you may have heard of called America Online.
Yes.
And I'm in a meeting with this guy, and he asked for my business plan, and because I thankfully was smart enough to know this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I better have a business plan, so I did. And handed him the comic books, and he brought the rest of the investors on board to put the money into the show. It wasn't much, it was $120,000. And to put the money into the project to bring it to life. And so basically 15 months later, we premiered this hybrid radio play comic book experience thing at the Long Center. 2,100 people came out to the premiere.
That's great.
We sold $6,000 of merchandise. 10 days later, I went to a regional booking conference, like basically a trade show for touring theatrical and performing arts productions, and ended up with, flash forward a few months later, about 20 bookings out of that for a tour. Have now hooked up with an agent out of LA at one of the big talent agencies to book the tour. I now have a book agent.
So
we're
you got
touring,
a job.
and I have a job. And so this season we're touring to, at this point it's 32 venues this theatrical season, and then we've got, this is the mind-boggling thing, is that next season we're in discussion with more than 90 venues to bring the show out, and we're going up and down the Midwest to the West Coast, in the Northeast, and then all the way to Australia.
Well, at that point, do you think about having basically 2 touring companies for Intergalactic Nemesis?
We actually do. I've already started sort of piecing that puzzle together. So we don't have 2 sets on the technical side. I only have 1 set of that right now, but I do have 2 sets of performers to do the show.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the project itself. What's the elevator pitch for the comic book?
Well, it's a great question, particularly in light of what you're trying to do with these interviews, because the elevator pitch on a comic book is the live show.
Yeah.
Because, if I go to a comic book convention with this, there's my artwork on display along with every other artwork on Artist Alley. It all bleeds together.
And it's sensory overload. If you've ever done the San Diego show, and I've done that
like 20 years in a row. You just go in, and it's like those Japanese cartoons that cause seizures after a while. You just want to be somewhere else for a while.
Yeah, it's just all the artwork. Whatever. Let's even say that all the artwork is absolutely top notch. It's still like there's a point at which you can only look at so much top notch artwork all at the same time. And so when we've done the Austin Comic Con last year, people would come up to the booth and ask me about the project, and I'd say, well, it's kind of an adventure story. It's set in the 1930s. It's got this amazing lead female character, which is kind of unusual, and it's inspired by Raiders of the Lost Ark and the pulps of the era, and and people go, oh, that sounds interesting, and then I go, and it's also a live show, and then literally it's universal. People's eyes go, huh?
Yes.
And then I explain how we do it. 3 actors voice all the characters, live sound effects that you see being performed, a live score, and then on the screen we're projecting over 1,250 individual, hand-drawn, full-color, high-resolution, blow-your-mind comic book images. And people go, holy crow, I want to see that.
Yes.
So the show becomes the thing that people remember, and then what happens is at the performances, we're literally selling hundreds of books at every performance. So the book sales happen as a result of people coming out of the show having had a really great time and wanting to take a piece of that home with them.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is that there are a lot of small publishers, let's say including me, who put out a lot of really interesting material that never quite finds an audience, but going the live route, you've managed to find and essentially create your own audience for the comics.
That's exactly right. And what's really interesting, because I've been talking with my agent is used to projects that have a life on YouTube. Which we're on YouTube, but we haven't had the hundreds of thousands of hits on our videos or anything close to those kind of numbers. Yeah. And he was pressuring me like, well, you got to create a viral YouTube video, like as if that's something that somebody can just do, right? And
the only viruses people create are computer worms.
Right, exactly. So so it's utterly counterintuitive in this day and age of digital everything, that something that is almost the opposite of digital, a live performance, would be the thing that captures people's attention. But maybe it's because of the fact that it's so counterintuitive that maybe that's the thing that captures people's attention.
The thing that I liked about it is I liked that it shows its pulp roots. I also like the fact that as the story goes on, it gets crazier.
Yeah.
There are spaceships made out of tentacles flying around, grabbing other ships. There's a planet full of robots. It's just, it starts out and it looks like it's going to be kind of Raiders of the Ark pastiche, and the next thing you know,
you're in the Eftel and Plitzen part. Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, well, the big inspirations for the storytelling are totally the science fiction storytelling style of the 1930s and 40s, where science itself really doesn't matter very much, and it's just as far as your imagination. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So tell us about Molly Sloan, your lead character.
Yeah. Molly Sloan, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, the first woman ever to win the Pulitzer Prize. A woman of a woman whose entire being is founded, her strength is her skepticism. That's what makes her such a great reporter, is that she is a natural skeptic. So she asks questions about everything and won't believe things until they're proven to be true. So when she is suddenly rescued, not once, but twice in life-threatening situations by a man who claims to be a librarian from Flagstaff, Arizona, yet she has her assistant do the research. There is no record of a Ben Wilcott at the Flagstaff Public Library. And then this man tells her that in 162 years from now, there is going to be an invasion of sludge monsters from the planet Zygon that is going to destroy Earth. Molly's skeptical nature steps in, and naturally, she doesn't believe it. And part of her kind of awesome journey is coming to face with things that are just too impossible to be true.
Yes, you would look at somebody who told you that like they were a lunatic.
Yeah, exactly.
I liked that early on there was a bit of a role reversal where the Timmy character is kind of the perpetual hostage. You know, the guy who's always doing the thing that you should least do in that situation.
Well, Timmy Mendez, he's Molly's assistant, and he is the epitome of naivete. He comes from rural West Texas. He grew up on a hog farm. He's, as he puts it to Molly, he's just never done any. Suddenly, he's in this world where there's world traveling, and she's Molly. Her father is William Randolph Sloan, the millionaire publisher. You know, she comes from that sort of jet-setting lifestyle, even before there were jets. And here's Timmy, this wide-eyed kid, you know, a very Jimmy Olsen-esque character. Yes. You know, kind of suddenly immersed in this world of adventure. And Timmy's naivete actually becomes one of his sort of amazing strengths. As, for example, he points out to the bad guy in the story, Mysterion, who is very excited about conquering every corner of the globe. And,
I like him. He's a classic villain.
He is a classic villain, and he likes to talk, and he's full of himself. And, you know, yes, he's going to conquer every corner of the globe. And as Timmy points out, the globe is a sphere. It doesn't have any corners.
Yes. I like that. That was a good punchline. I like the in one scene the characters are in a Middle Eastern market area, and they run across this sinister parrot that was a lot of fun. This parrot is just telling him terrible things one after another, and it would be like getting, you know, death threats in a fortune cookie. So I thought that was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's one of the the tropes we're playing with is like, you know, the sinister foreshadow, you know, Quoth the Raven, nevermore, you know, the sort of ridiculous Gothic foreshadowing. But in our case, it amounts to absolutely nothing.
Exactly. I like the high concept of, is it Robonovia?
Yeah.
The planet of robots.
I do too. Who doesn't like a planet of robots?
Exactly. I like that in the story they seem to be all different shapes and sizes for whatever, you know, their lot in life or their job in life is.
Yeah, we've come up with over the years kind of a hefty backstory on the planet Robonovia, which barely gets touched on in the story. If people read the comic books, one of the things I really had fun with was creating a little extra material at the end of each book. And you get the Cerebratron, who's this benevolent supercomputer that rules Robonovia. You get his logs on how Robonovia became a planet of robot. Actually, I can't remember which issue, but at the end of one of the issues, there's a little bit of backstory on that. But yeah, way too much fun.
That seemed like it was fun, and also there was a parallel between the robot planet and the planet Zygon.
Yeah, well, they're they're foils for one another. You know, you have this clean, sleek, platinum super city planet of Robonovia versus the sludge-based, rusty, dirty, smelly, organic.
But they've all got the one kind of central intelligence guiding them.
Oh, that is true. Yeah, that is absolutely true, isn't it? Well, you know, one of the things that was really fun about writing the story and is the characters win through their smarts. Mm-hmm. You know, there's that...
there's a great gag with Salt, very H.G. Wells.
Right, yeah. And, but the characters are, even, you know, the superpower, if you will, that sort of comes up is kind of consistently mind power. And I think, you know, when we were originally developing the story, you know, way back when, we didn't give probably that much thought to it at all, except that element kept repeating. And I found, of course, because first of all, we're smart people writing it, but second of all, that is, you know, that, I don't know, if there's a message in it, it's about, you know, finding creative solutions to problems, and the characters do that again and again and again.
I like how several things were explained by kind of mental ability of one of the characters.
Exactly.
And I thought that was pretty clever. So, do you think that it's just the pulp genre that would work in terms of a high concept live graphic novel theater thing, or do you think like westerns or procedurals, or just would anything work, or is it just...
I think anything would work. The trick with it is, I mean, I think one of the reasons that Intergalactic works is this in this sort of live action graphic novel format that we've created is that it started as a theatrical script. One of the big, like everyone else out there who reads comic books, I'm a huge fan of Alan Moore's work. And Watchmen, I mean, what an incredible book. I read it when I was 19 and got one thing out of it. I read it when I was 29 and got something else out of it. I read it when I was 39 and got something completely different out of it. Then I realized it's a story about midlife crisis,
Yes.
So, what an amazing book. The translation into the movie, I think, failed because the writers were too precious with the dialogue that Moore wrote. And Alan Moore does not write dialogue that is meant to be spoken aloud by anybody. So
I think that their footsteps were too literal.
yeah, but a big part of that was the dialogue. The words that came out of those people's mouths when they were actually spoken just don't sound good. And they don't sound natural, and they're really hard to act. And so because of our background in theater with this project, I think that's people, when they talk about the show after having seen it, one of the things that gets mentioned again and again is how creative and clever the dialogue is. And I think that, the dialogue is such an essential element of a performance like that, that if you took, I don't know, somebody suggested to me, oh, you should do Superman #1. I have a feeling, I've never done it, but if you read Superman 1 aloud, it probably would be pretty clunky.
Somebody did a side-by-side comparison recently of X-Men comics from the 60s and now. You would ordinarily get the amount of words per panel in a 60s comic that you would now get in words per page.
Oh, I
now.
totally believe that, yeah.
Those comics were
Dense.
heavily written.
Yeah.
And modern comics essentially lean on the art mostly. Mm-hmm.
And so our thing is definitely a high, well, it's interesting you say that, because as I was adapting the radio play into the comic book, I really thought about, it came down to word counts. I didn't want to have more than 20 words in a, in a nine panel grid. I didn't want to have more than 20 words per panel, and if possible, a lot fewer.
It does make it a quick read.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to keep a production under 90 minutes, you need to be able to do that.
Yeah, and so, really relying heavily on, but when I brought it back to the live action graphic novel format, that live hybrid of radio play and comic book, I brought a bunch of dialogue that's in the radio play back into the production because, again, in a comic book, the dialogue, it's a particular way of writing. And an audience looking at it, you can take as much time as you want with each image. You could flip back to, oh, did I miss something? And you can flip back. Well, you can't do that in a straight up live performance. No. So I needed more kind of guideposts for the audience to be able to follow along, particularly as the story gets kind of intentionally convoluted.
Yeah. Does that mean that you went back and re-lettered some images for the stage play, or you just have people?
The stage play is done without, there's no lettering. So in the stage version, we just project the artwork without the word balloons.
That's good. That makes your script a little more flexible that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I volunteer with the Austin Film Fest people. Somebody's got to make the badges and stuff the envelopes and do the boring stuff. And in exchange, I get a great badge and I get to go see interesting people talk film. Going through the process of getting ready for Austin Film Fest in 2024, I was going through the catalog and I saw Jason's name pop up along with a new headshot with a very serious mustache. So he was there promoting a film called Fugitive Dreams that came out in 2024. And that film's at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's available to watch on Apple TV. I'll probably go through it sometime this year and, see if it lives up to the big reviews. Anyway, I had a chance to run into Jason. We said hi, we made a little bit of small talk, and then we got on our way. I think the world of comics misses him if he's got some free time. Anyway, that's the show. That was your footnote. Have a good one. We'll do another one of these here in a few days.